Bonjour to tout le monde, and thank you, Madame Wong, for so many kind words that I cannot possibly live up to that introduction. I apologize to you for the fact that I'm speaking in English in Quebec City, but I cannot sustain the sufficient French to get through this presentation. I do apologize for that. Je suis désolé. Now, it's a great pleasure for me to be here in Quebec. I regard what is happening here as the most advanced approach to active aging and age-friendly communities in the world. And really, I've come out of solidarity to colleagues in Quebec, particularly Suzanne Garon and her co-workers, to support the superb work that they're doing here. Now, I've been asked to look at how active aging and age-friendly cities can be better integrated. This is my agenda. I look briefly at the meaning and importance of active aging, then the barriers to its adoption. Ask the question, are age-friendly communities or cities and active aging integrated sufficiently? And then make some suggestions about how we can move forward towards a closer synergy between those two. I should briefly explain the logos that appear on these slides, and that is what Minister Wong already referred to as the New Dynamics of Aging Research Program. This is the largest multidisciplinary research program ever mounted in Europe, and I urge you to go to the website, the NDA website, and you will find many, many resources, information and data to support the work you're doing in your local communities and cities. And I should also point out that there is a Canadian branch of the New Dynamics of Aging Research Program supported by the Canadian on Aging. There are 8 institutions in Canada, 3 of them in Quebec, that are members of the New Dynamics of Aging Research Program. So that's a word from my sponsor. Now to the main business. I'm going to cover a lot of ground in these slides, so these are the key messages that I'd like you to take away. Active aging is the essential policy approach for the achievement of age-friendly societies. However, the minimal version of active aging applied in most countries is inadequate for that task. To be effective, active aging must be based on clear principles and aware of the huge barriers to its adoption. And fourthly, active aging and age-friendly communities depend on partnerships between individuals, organizations, society, and government. So let's kick off here. Why is active aging so important? Well, personally, I regard it as the leading policy that governments and communities can adopt in the face of population aging. Not only will it ensure that everyone's opportunities are maximized as they age, but also it will enable us to prevent many of the predicted negative consequences of population aging. And you've heard a great deal about those in the media and from policymakers. So what we have in active aging is a rare social policy that is good for people, good for citizens, but also potentially good for exchequers. So, not surprisingly, active aging has become a global phenomenon. And you know this very well. I've no need to go through it. But I do need to pay tribute to the great work of the WHO in producing this mold-breaking approach to active aging, and to also my old friend Alex Kaleshe as the driver behind the production of this new approach to active aging. It was also given global prominence because it was put centrally in the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging. And where I come from in Europe, active aging is really the main policy response by European governments to population aging. And you know very well here in Quebec, the government strategy towards aging and older people has active aging built into the heart of it. Now, when we trace the origins of the idea of active aging, we see that it was not born in 2002, but actually 50 years earlier in activity theory, which argued essentially that activity promotes well-being. Although actually, at the time, back in the 1950s, there was very little evidence to support that contention. So, cutting a long story short, what we know as active aging is in part a derivative of that original idea of activity back in the 1950s. However, back then, there were numerous flaws, criticisms of the activity approach. For example, it failed to take account of the barriers that people may face in order to try to be active, both individual barriers and societal barriers, such as age discrimination. But despite those criticisms, there is a fundamental truth at the heart of activity theory, and that is the strong positive association between activity levels and health and well-being. And now, today, the evidence to support that is overwhelming. It wasn't in the 1950s, but now it is absolutely overwhelming. And I don't have time to go through all of that evidence here, but this is the latest example where you will find paper upon paper of evidence about how important activity can be in the promotion of well-being. So, turning secondly, I said that if we want to successfully adopt active aging, we must understand the barriers to it. And I'm going to identify here 5 specific barriers that are holding back the advance of active aging. And these barriers help us to explain why it is that the progress of active aging in different parts of the globe is so uneven, even in single countries. Those barriers are political, they're cultural, they're bureaucratic, they're societal, and they are rooted in the inequality that exists between people as they age and older people. First of all, there is the political and policy barriers. And what this means, basically, is that there is a great deal of confusion about what active aging is and what it's trying to achieve. These are the various children of activity, of the activity perspective. And although they seem similar, all of them emphasize different things in different ways. But so often in our policy documents and prescriptions, they are used as being synonymous with active aging. They masquerade very often as active aging. And this is not a simple point about labels. They mean different things. Take what, to my mind, is the least useful of these children of the activity perspective, successful aging. This sets a norm that older people are supposed to aspire to, a cultural norm. And what happens to those people who do not aspire to it, who are unsuccessful? That is not the spirit of active aging, which is supposed to be inclusive and embrace everyone. Another example, healthy aging is often seen by policymakers as being the same or similar to active aging, but they are fundamentally different in terms of scope, focus, citizen engagement, and power relations. Healthy aging is focused on health. It tends towards professionalization. It tends towards top-down. Whereas active aging is meant to be more bottom-up, more inclusive, and meant to engage all of the sectors that support well-being and not just health. So in practice, healthy aging should be regarded as a subset of active aging, but that is rarely the case. Still on the policy and political point, there is the problem that active aging has been hijacked by some policymakers. They've stolen it and turned it into something very, very narrow and reductionist, called working longer. Active aging is just about working longer. The answer to population aging is to get people to work longer. So it destroys the richness and the possibilities of active aging by a simplistic reduction. And this is very powerful in Europe, where I come from, but also in other countries as well. It is not active aging. It reduces active aging to a very blunt instrument in the labor market. Also, I would add, it's self-defeating, because you can't make people work longer if they don't have the capacity, the skills, the education, and the health in order to do so. In other words, you need a broad conception of active aging if you want to achieve the reduction of working longer. Still on the policy and political point, some interesting work by colleagues in Europe on a new active aging index reveals that there are very wide variations between European countries in the priority that they give to active aging. If you compare, you can hardly do it, I'm sure, at the back, but France and Sweden. In the case of France, there's a very low priority to all of the different dimensions of active aging nationally compared with Sweden. In the same continent, two countries that are very close together but approach the concept of active aging in very different ways. And in Poland, there is a very negative outcome compared to the Western European countries. In short, there is no universal understanding about what active aging actually is. And that's a serious problem if we want to implement it and build it into our age-friendly community strategies. The second barrier is cultural. It's a very important cultural barrier. And it includes stereotypes like this, which say, and this is from my local newspaper in the city of Sheffield, which say, this is what active aging is all about. You have to be a fit, healthy 89-year-old. And of course, that includes such a narrow band of people and excludes millions and millions of other older people who would like to be part of the active aging idea. There are also semantical barriers which go beyond the use of erroneous labels. For example, in the ex-Soviet bloc countries of Central Europe, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe, active aging means something very specific. It means rapid aging, not what we mean by active aging. So you go to those countries and you try to speak the language of active aging, they're horrified. It's rapid aging at the individual level because of poor working conditions and so on, and it's the horror of rapid aging at the national level. So we can't use the same language, the same currency in debating these issues with those countries. The third set of barriers are bureaucratic. Now, I will state categorically, active aging requires a holistic, joined up, where all the sectors are joined up, perspective. But everywhere, at national level and at local level, responsibilities are divided. And what that is a silo approach. It works against the full appreciation of what active aging could achieve. So between the different departments, at state level, at city level, at national level, there's pensions, there's health, there's employment, there's education, there's transport. Who owns aging? You can probably find who owns older people, but who owns aging across the life course? So silo thinking within the bureaucracies of governments are very important barriers to the achievement of active aging. It encourages us to look at education, to look at healthcare, to look at older workers, but not to look at aging in the round. The fourth set of barriers are societal. And this includes the dominant age-segmented approach. Again, this encourages silo thinking. So, active aging is for the retired, of course. Well, how can you develop a life course perspective when the focus is on just the latter part of the life course? It's not for all age groups, it's just for the retired. And as the Quebec aging policy emphasizes, a crucial societal barrier is ageism. Now, ageism has a number of effects. Of course, ageism excludes older people. We know that. There's strong evidence. But it has other reverberations too. It encourages younger people to look the other way. I don't want to think about aging. I'm not interested in aging. That's for older people. I'm not aging. Of course, they are. It encourages older people to take a stoical, often stigmatized position. How many times have you heard an older person in your community say, "At my age, what can you expect?" Now, that is a direct result of age discrimination, which limits the possibilities rather than expanding them and saying that aging right across the life course to the very final point should be about expanding opportunities, expanding life chances. And also, don't underestimate the insidious impact of the anti-aging industry, which reduces aging to appearance and something that you can cure from a bottle or from a tube. It's amusing on one level, but on another it's deadly serious. It's another reduction in the aging field. And the fifth and final barrier that we have to confront is unequal aging. And this is massively neglected by policymakers across the globe. First of all, there is unequal aging within countries based on age, based on gender, ethnicity, and so on. Second, There is unequal aging between countries at the same level of development. I'll give you an example in Europe in a moment. And thirdly, there are global inequalities, particularly between the developed North and the less developed South. All of them demand an active aging strategy that is comprehensive and inclusive. Here's the example from Europe. Just in one small continent, there is a 12-year healthy life expectancy gap between Denmark on the one hand and Latvia on the other. Healthy life expectancy at 65 in Latvia is 2 years on average, and in Denmark, 12 years. In less developed countries, there are some basic human rights issues that have to be dealt with first before an active aging strategy can have a hope to be implemented. One example from thousands. There are 340 million older people globally without secure incomes, without the basis for a secure livelihood. 340 million. As a result, many of them, like this woman in South India, are forced to continue working in the shadow economy in order to raise money. This is a project under the New Dynamics of Aging research program, and you'll find details of it on the NDA website. So, having looked at the barriers to active aging, how are active aging and age-friendly communities connected? Are they integrated? And what can we do about it? Well, the answer is not really. There is, at best, a lack of clarity about the relationship between active aging and age-friendly cities or communities. For example, the WHO guide notes that the purpose of age-friendly cities is to tap the potential of older people. That's not a LifeCourse perspective. That is focusing very much on the latter part of the LifeCourse. In a similar vein, age-friendly cities are about access for older people. But importantly, as you'll see at the bottom, the guide does point out that active aging is a lifelong process. Therefore, an age-friendly city is not just elderly friendly. And this is an important issue for us and is really the nub of what I'm saying to you today. If we look at the 8 topic areas, around half of the 169 items explicitly mention older people and disabled people. So, what I'm saying is that there is a risk that age-friendly becomes aged-friendly, not aging-friendly. And we have to work hard to ensure that the focus is aging, including older people, and not just aged, because that is only ever about the last part of the life course. And we miss all of the aging that takes place from birth through to old age. Now, coming to the outstanding example of an attempt to integrate active aging and age-friendly city policies, Quebec, Aging and Living Together. I'm sure most of you in the room know that very well. This is a really superb policy statement that is rooted in a comprehensive approach to active aging and the aim of a society for all ages. I regard it as a global model, and I congratulate colleagues in Quebec for the development of this strategy. Though, and one had to search quite hard to find this, I should point out, the relationship between policies on active aging and older people are not always clear. It's not always clear whether the strategy is about older people or about the aging process. As far as the action plan itself is concerned, it is absolutely unequivocal. This is an age-less approach or an aging approach, an approach that tries to put age on one side and say this is about a society for all ages and all people. It emphasizes participation, health, and community. I'd like to add also, for those of you who haven't read it, it's guided by clear principles with measurable actions. Unlike many others of this kind, it tries hard to integrate active aging and age-friendly communities. So, the final item on my agenda is the challenge of integrating active aging within the age-friendly community framework. Quebec shows the way, but Quebec is way out in front. The rest of us need to, in all of our cities and our communities, need to think hard about how we can achieve this trick of integrating active aging across the life course with a policy that focuses on older people as well. And the starting point is to recognize that active aging should be the cornerstone of any age-friendly community strategy. And if it is to be that, it must be grounded in universal principles. So wherever active aging is implemented, we know what it is. It's attempting to do the same thing. It doesn't necessarily take the same form, of course not, but it's guided by the same principles. And I've here listed 8 such principles that seem to me to be the fundamental ones if we want to achieve that synergy between active aging and age-friendly communities. It should focus on all activities, that is anything, mental and physical, that contributes to well-being across the life course. It must adopt a life course perspective. So this is about not just dealing with people when they have lost a lot of their physical and mental capacity, but by starting at an early age saying, how can we ensure that when people reach advanced old age, they have as many of those capacities with them as possible? So it's a preventative strategy, both primary and secondary prevention. It must be based on generational solidarity, generativity, the idea that the older generations owe responsibility to the younger generations. And just note, the life course perspective and the preventative approach embrace all ages. They tell us that this is not just for older people and not just for fit older people. We must find a place in our active aging strategies for the very frail. No one should be excluded from this strategy. So we need to conceptualize what active aging means for those in residential and nursing homes. How can we develop an active strategy for those so that everyone is included, not in the same way, of course, but in some way? There has to be gender equality. There has to be respect for cultural and ethnic diversity. There must be an empowerment approach. And what we do has to be intersectoral, comprehensive, everyone working in partnership at different levels of society and across society. We might slightly modify the definition of active aging too, so as to highlight the multi-level partnerships required. This doesn't do damage to the original definition, because participation remains central, and that is the essence of active aging. So if we accept those principles, then we can begin to identify some key policies that reflect those basic principles. And here are just some examples of the kinds of things I mean at different levels of society. At the macro level, challenging ageism, health promotion across the LifeCourse. At the organizational level, age management, to ensure that younger people, when they join an organization as an employee, keep their skills and their education level all the way through their working life. Design for all ages, active care homes, and so on and so on. You get the idea, I hope, that one can build on the basis of those principles a whole range of different policies that bring in every possible actor, and not forgetting, of course, the individual level and the responsibility of the individual to take part in these opportunities. This slide simply expresses the necessity for partnerships to defeat the dominant silo thinking. And this slide makes the point that the LifeCourse is critical. What it shows is some fresh evidence from that New Dynamics of Aging research program that there is a direct link between childhood social conditions and later life physical and cognitive capability. Robust, strong evidence that childhood conditions are linked to later life physical and cognitive capability. If there is nothing else in this conference that says to you, we must adopt a LifeCourse perspective, this is it. It absolutely is it. There are two messages we can take from this research. First of all, active aging in later life is greatly influenced by childhood circumstances. And secondly, social policy is more important than genetics in explaining these outcomes. These are really powerful messages from research, from the best possible research, that we need to take to policymakers in our local communities. Now, I acknowledge this is complex territory. I'm not pretending otherwise. And I can imagine if I was an advisor to Minister Wong and I went along to her office and I said, Minister, I've got the answer to active aging. It's tackling child poverty. She would look at me and say, that's not my job, that's the child welfare department. And that's the problem, isn't it? It's the silo thinking and the silo structures, where one department is responsible for aging and another department is responsible for child welfare. Who is doing the joined-up thinking that links the deprivation in childhood to the poor outcome in old age? Well, I'm not going to be deterred by the challenge. I'm going to press on and make the point. Responding to that research evidence and trying to counteract the silo thinking or the sectoral thinking, what we need are age-friendly community strategies that adopt a LifeCourse approach. And they must start with fetal health, nutrition, antenatal care. They must focus on the early years to ensure that all young people have the best start in life. They must also focus on school age, ensuring that life chances are maximized, that people are prepared for a long life. They understand ageism from a very early age. They know what age-friendly communities are from a very early age. And then, for people of working age, we have to have continuous education and training, active engagement in community life. And only then, when we get to later life, are we talking about maintaining health and autonomy, because that's been the project right across the life course, engaging in new activities, continuing learning. In other words, what I'm arguing here is that by adopting an explicit life course policy, we can ensure that active aging and age-friendly community strategies are fully integrated. Well, that was my agenda, and I hope very much that I did what I said I would do. Only you can be the judge on that, or my friend on the left here. Let me conclude by reiterating the complexity of the tasks that are confronting us. I would bet that all of us in this room want the same things. We want a society in which people of all ages have the human right and the freedom to maximize their capabilities and to realize themselves as individuals, and to do so in the context of supportive families and supportive communities. In other words, we all want a society for all ages. And we know that the experience of older people is based largely on the earlier life course. And we know that there are many older people now who have aged without the benefit of an active aging strategy. Therefore, the difficulty facing us is to have a general active aging strategy, an age-friendly community strategy for all ages, as well as a specific one that focuses on those older people who need help now to overcome exclusion and age discrimination, and to maximize their participation, of course. Now, if that seems to you like a tall order, just take a look at what Quebec is trying to do. Quebec is showing us how it is possible to balance the interests of different generations by integrating, at least trying to integrate, active aging and age-friendly communities. Thank you.